The sound of Kim Tae-jun's handcrafted leather shoes echoed through the marble corridors of Daehan Corporation's headquarters in Gangnam. At 32, he had transformed his family's modest electronics business into one of South Korea's most powerful tech conglomerates. His impeccably tailored charcoal suit and piercing dark eyes reflected the relentless ambition that had earned him the nickname, the Iron Wolf of Seoul. But this crisp October morning, his usually composed face betrayed an unusual tension. His grandfather's call had been brief but absolute. "Come to the family estate immediately. It concerns the future of our bloodline." Chairman Kim Do-hyun, the legendary founder of Daehan Corporation, rarely summoned emergency family meetings. At 85, the silver-haired patriarch still commanded respect from every corner of Korea's business world. Tae-jun's black Genesis sedan wound through the tree-lined streets of Pyeongchang, past the traditional Hanok houses where Seoul's elite resided. The Kim family estate, a stunning blend of modern architecture and classical Korean design, stood majestically against the autumn foliage of Namsan Mountain. Inside the traditional meeting room, his grandfather knelt on silk cushions before a low lacquer table. The room's Ondal heating system kept the space warm despite the October chill. Beside him, in an unprecedented sight, sat Chairman Park Jin-woo of Myri Industries, Daehan's most bitter rival and father of Tae-juna. His grandfather's weathered voice cut through the silence. "Sit. We must discuss your future." The tension in the room was suffocating. Tae-jun lowered himself onto the cushions across from the two patriarchs, maintaining his composure despite the surreal nature of the situation. "As you know," Chairman Kim continued, his gnarled hands steady on the teacup, "the Kim and Park families have been locked in competition for 3 generations. But times are changing. The Chinese are dominating our markets, the Americans are imposing new sanctions, and the Japanese are cutting their investments. Our rivalry is weakening us both." Chairman Park nodded gravely. "The survival of our companies, and our nation's economic independence, requires unprecedented measures." Tae-jun's jaw tightened. He had heard whispers of this conversation in boardrooms across Seoul, but he had never imagined it would concern him directly. "You will marry Park So-young," his grandfather announced with the finality of a court judgment. "The union of our families will create the strongest chaebol in Korea's history. The wedding will take place in 6 months." The words hit Tae-jun like a physical blow. Park So-young, his Harvard Business School classmate, his professional nemesis, the woman who had stolen 3 major deals from under his nose in the past 2 years. She was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely insufferable. Their public confrontations at industry conferences had become legendary among Seoul's business circles. "Harabiaji," Tae-jun said carefully, using the respectful term for grandfather. "Surely there are other ways to—" "There are no other ways," Chairman Park interrupted sharply. "My daughter has already agreed. She understands duty, unlike some people." The insult stung, but Tae-jun kept his expression neutral. Park So-young had agreed? The same woman who had publicly declared that she would rather eat glass than work with Kim Tae-jun had consented to marry him? Chapter 2: The Enemy's Face. 3 days later, Tae-jun found himself in the penthouse restaurant of the Lotte World Tower, overlooking the Han River's serpentine path through Seoul. The meeting had been arranged by their families, a formal dinner to discuss arrangements. The irony wasn't lost on him that this restaurant was where he had closed his biggest deal the previous year, defeating Myri Industries in a bidding war that had cost them 50 billion won. Park So-young arrived precisely on time, as he expected. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Her midnight blue dress was elegant yet professional, her long black hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. At 29, she was already executive vice president of Myri Industries and widely regarded as the most formidable businesswoman of her generation. "Kim Sajangnam," she said with a slight bow, using the formal address for company president, though her tone carried an edge of mockery. "Park Bujangnam," he replied, standing and returning the bow with equally cool formality. They sat across from each other at a private table, the glittering lights of Seoul spread below them like scattered diamonds. For several minutes they ate in silence, the weight of their situation settling between them like an invisible wall. So Young finally spoke, setting down her chopsticks. How does it feel to be traded like livestock? Taejun nearly choked on his banchan. Despite everything, her directness caught him off guard. I could ask you the same question. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. At least you're honest about it. Most Korean men would pretend this was some grand romantic gesture. And most Korean women would pretend to be honored by the arrangement. I'm not most Korean women. No, he agreed, studying her face. You're not. So Young leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes calculating. Let me be clear about something, Kim Taejun. I have no intention of being the docile wife my father expects. I will not give up my career, I will not defer to your decisions, and I certainly won't pretend to love you. Good, he replied coolly. Because I have no intention of pretending to be a devoted husband. This is a business merger, nothing more. She nodded approvingly. Then we understand each other. We do. But let me be equally clear, if we're going to do this, we do it properly. No affairs, no scandals, no embarrassing either of our families. The press will be watching every move we make. Agreed. And once our fathers retire and we consolidate the companies, we can quietly divorce. 2 years should be sufficient. They shook hands across the table, a cold, professional gesture that sealed their fate. Chapter 3: The Wedding of the Century. The months that followed passed in a whirlwind of preparations, media attention, and corporate maneuvering. The engagement announcement had sent shockwaves through Seoul's business community. Stock prices for both companies soared as investors anticipated the mega-merger. Wedding planners, caterers, and designers competed for the privilege of organizing what the press dubbed the wedding of the century. So Young threw herself into her work with even greater intensity, as if trying to prove that marriage wouldn't slow her down. She successfully launched Myri's new AI division and secured a major contract with Samsung, all while dealing with endless fittings for her wedding hanbok. Taejun, meanwhile, expanded Daehan's operations into Southeast Asia, establishing partnerships in Vietnam and Thailand. But he found himself oddly distracted during board meetings, his thoughts wandering to conversations with his future wife, their clinical discussions about prenuptials, living arrangements, and public appearances. They maintained their professional rivalry even while planning their wedding. When So-young suggested holding the ceremony at the Shilla Hotel, Taejun countered with the Grand Hyatt. When he proposed a traditional Korean ceremony, she insisted on including Western elements. Their wedding planners often felt like referees in a corporate negotiation. The night before their wedding, Taejun stood on the balcony of his Hanamdong penthouse, gazing out at the city lights. His phone buzzed with a text from So-young. Second thoughts? He typed back. Too late now. You. Never. See you at the altar, husband. The single word, husband, sent an unexpected chill through him. Chapter 4: Unexpected Intimacy. The wedding was everything the media had anticipated and more. 300 guests filled the grand ballroom of the Paradise Hotel, including government ministers, chaebol leaders, and celebrities. So-young looked ethereal in her traditional jaggery and chima, the silk fabric adorned with gold phoenixes and peonies. Taejun wore a deep navy hanbok with intricate silver embroidery, looking every inch the powerful businessman he was. As they bowed to each other in the traditional paibik ceremony, their eyes met for a brief moment. Something passed between them, not love, but perhaps a grudging respect for what they were both sacrificing. The reception was a carefully choreographed affair. They danced their first dance to a string quartet's rendition of Moon River, moving together with practiced precision. So-young's hand in his was surprisingly warm, and he caught a hint of her perfume, jasmine and sandalwood. Smile, she whispered as cameras flashed around them. We're supposed to be blissfully happy. I am smiling, he murmured back. That's your board meeting smile. Try something more human. Despite himself, he nearly laughed. This is as human as I get. God help us both, she replied, but there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Their honeymoon in Jeju Island was planned as a public relations exercise. Romantic photos for the magazines, carefully staged moments of marital bliss. They stayed in separate bedrooms of a luxury resort, maintaining the facade during the day and retreating to their respective spaces at night. But on their third evening, as they walked along the black sand beach of Hyopji, something shifted. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for once, there were no cameras, no schedules, no corporate obligations. "This is actually peaceful," So-young admitted, slipping off her sandals to feel the sand between her toes. "Don't sound so surprised," Taejun replied, loosening his tie. "I do have the occasional human moment." She glanced at him sideways. "I'm still waiting to see evidence of that." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of waves filling the space between them. Eventually, So-young spoke again. "Can I ask you something? We're married now. I suppose you can ask me anything. Why did you really agree to this? And don't give me the company line about duty and family honor." Taejun considered the question seriously. "Because the alternative was watching everything my grandfather built crumble under foreign competition." "What about you?" "Same reason, I suppose. Plus," she hesitated, "I was curious." "Curious about what?" "About you. We've been enemies for so long, I wondered what you were like when you weren't trying to destroy my business deals." He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, she looked younger, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "And what's the verdict?" "Still deciding," she said with a small smile. "But you're less terrible than I expected." High praise from Park So-young. The highest you're likely to get. Chapter 5: Cracks in the Armor. Back in Seoul, they settled into their new life in Taejun's penthouse, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. So-young had her own wing of the apartment, complete with a home office where she worked late into the night. They saw each other mainly during their carefully orchestrated public appearances and the occasional shared breakfast. But proximity bred familiarity, and familiarity began to erode their carefully maintained distance. Taejun discovered that So-young was an insomniac who often wandered the kitchen at 3 in the morning, making elaborate cups of tea. So-young learned that Taejun played piano when he was stressed, Chopin nocturnes echoing through the apartment during particularly difficult business periods. One night, unable to sleep due to jet lag from a business trip to Singapore, Taejun found So-young on the living room balcony, wrapped in a silk robe and staring out at the city. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Too much caffeine." "You!" "Singapore is still calling my name, apparently." They stood side by side in comfortable silence. The city sprawled below them, a constellation of lights stretching to the mountains. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if our grandfathers hadn't been rivals?" So-young asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if we had met under different circumstances. At university, maybe, or at some random business conference. If we had just been people." Taejun considered this. "We probably would have hated each other anyway. We're too similar." "Are we?" She turned to look at him, genuine curiosity in her eyes. "I always thought we were complete opposites. We're both obsessive perfectionists with control issues and an unhealthy dedication to our work. We both put business before everything else, including our own happiness. And we both pretend to be stronger than we actually are." So-young was quiet for a long moment. "I never thought of it that way. We're more alike than either of us wants to admit. Maybe that's why we make such good enemies. And such complicated spouses," she added dryly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then So-young's phone buzzed with an email notification, breaking the spell. "Late-night crisis from the Tokyo office," she said, checking the message. "I should go," Taejun said. "I understand." But as she headed inside, she paused at the door. "Taejun? This, whatever this is, it's not what I expected." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Chapter 6: The Unraveling. The beginning of their second month, as a married couple brought unexpected challenges. A scandal erupted when photos surfaced of Taejun's ex-girlfriend, actress Song Miran, leaving his apartment building 6 months earlier, before the engagement was announced but after the marriage negotiations had begun. The timing looked damning, and the tabloids had a field day with headlines about his betrayal of So-young. So-young's reaction surprised him. Instead of the cold fury he expected, she seemed almost hurt. "I don't care about your past relationships," she said icily over breakfast, not looking up from her tablet. "But I do care about being made to look like a fool in public." "Nothing happened with Miran after our engagement was announced," Taejun said firmly. "Those photos are from months ago." "I know." Her voice was clipped, professional. "I had them investigated." The fact that she had bothered to investigate, to verify his story rather than simply assuming the worst, said something, though he wasn't sure what. The scandal passed, but it left something changed between them. So-young became more distant, more guarded. Their tentative evening conversation ceased. She worked even later, often falling asleep in her home office. 2 weeks later, Taejun returned from a business trip to find the apartment unusually quiet. It was past midnight, but So-young's office light was on. He knocked softly on the door. "Come in." Her voice sounded strained. He found her slumped over her desk, still in her business suit from the day, surrounded by financial reports and empty coffee cups. She looked exhausted. "When did you last sleep?" he asked. "What day is it?" "Wednesday." "Then? Monday? Maybe Sunday." She rubbed her eyes. "We're hemorrhaging money on the Australian expansion. The local partners are pulling out, and if I can't find a solution by Friday, we'll lose everything." Taejun moved around the desk to look at her computer screen. The numbers were indeed catastrophic. "Have you considered a joint venture? Split the risk with another company?" "With who?" "Every major player is either a competitor or already overextended in the Pacific market." She leaned back in her chair, defeat creeping into her voice. "My father is counting on me to make this work. If I fail..." "You won't fail." She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her tired features. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're Park So-young. You don't know how to fail." For a moment, her professional mask slipped completely, and he saw something vulnerable in her eyes, fear, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of expectations. "I could help," he heard himself saying. "What?" "Daehan has partnerships in Australia. I could make some calls, open some doors. Not as your competitor, as your husband." So-young stared at him for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" The question hung in the air between them. Why would he help his greatest rival succeed? Why would he care if she failed? "Because," he said quietly, "maybe it's time we stopped being enemies and started being partners." Chapter 7: The Awakening. The Australian crisis became a turning point. Working together 12 hours a day, they discovered an unexpected synergy. So-young's innovative marketing strategies complemented Taejun's financial expertise. Her network of international contacts opened doors that his traditional approach couldn't reach. Within 2 weeks, they had restructured the entire expansion, bringing in Daehan as a silent partner while allowing Myri to maintain control of operations. The success was reported in every major business publication in Korea, hailed as the first public cooperation between the historically rival families. But more importantly, it changed something fundamental between them. "We make a good team," So-young said one evening as they reviewed the final contracts in his home office. "We do," he agreed, looking up from his laptop. "I never expected that." She was curled up in the leather armchair across from his desk, her shoes kicked off, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her. The severe business attire had been replaced by comfortable jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. "Can I confess something?" she said suddenly. "What?" "I used to study your business strategies obsessively. Not just to compete with you, but because I was genuinely impressed by some of your innovations. You have this way of seeing 3 moves ahead that most people miss." The admission surprised him. I did the same thing with your campaigns. That luxury brand repositioning you did for LG last year? Brilliant. I actually tried to poach your marketing director. So-young laughed, the first truly genuine laugh he had heard from her. Kim Min-ji? She told me about that. I gave her a 30% raise to stay. Worth every one, I'm sure. They fell into comfortable conversation, sharing war stories from their respective companies, dissecting competitors' strategies, even laughing about some of their past confrontations. Taejun found himself watching her animated face as she spoke, noticing things he had never allowed himself to see before, the way her eyes lit up when discussing a particularly clever business move, the graceful gestures of her hands, the small scar above her left eyebrow that somehow made her even more beautiful. What? She asked, catching him staring. Nothing. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. She tucked her legs under her in the chair. When we were at Harvard, I thought you were this cold, calculating machine. All business, no humanity. I thought you were an ice princess who got everything handed to her because of her family name. I was an ice princess, she admitted with a rueful smile. But not because things were handed to me. Because I had to be twice as good as every man in the room just to be taken half as seriously. The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. I never thought about what it must have been like for you, being the only daughter expected to inherit everything. And I never considered what it was like for you, having to live up to your grandfather's legend while carving out your own identity. They looked at each other across the room, years of misconceptions and rivalry falling away. The attraction that had always simmered beneath their professional antagonism was suddenly undeniable. So-young, he started to say, but she was already rising from her chair. She crossed to his desk, her movement deliberate and sure. When she reached him, she placed her hands on either side of his chair, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. We're going to regret this, she whispered. Probably, he agreed, his voice rough. I don't care. Neither do I. When their lips met, it was with all the passion and frustration of 2 years of competition, all the tension and desire they had been denying. Her hands tangled in his hair as he pulled her down onto his lap, the contracts and laptops forgotten as they finally acknowledged what had been building between them since that first meeting in the restaurant. 1 year later, the merger of Daehan Corporation and Myri Industries was officially announced on their first wedding anniversary, creating the largest technology conglomerate in South Korean history. The press called it the marriage merger of the decade, not knowing how literally true that was. Taejun and So-young stood together on the podium of the Grand Hyatt's ballroom, fielding questions from reporters about their business strategy and future plans. They moved with perfect synchronization, finishing each other's sentences, presenting a united front that was no longer just for show. Mr. Kim, Mrs. Park Kim, called a reporter from the Korea Herald. There were initial skeptics who thought this marriage was purely a business arrangement. How do you respond to those who say love can't be forced? Taejun and So-young exchanged a look, one of many private communications that had developed between them over the past year. So-young stepped forward to answer. You're right that love can't be forced, she said, her voice clear and confident. But it can be discovered in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you think is your greatest enemy is actually your perfect match. Later that evening, they sat in their living room, no longer his apartment, but their home, sharing a bottle of champagne and reviewing the day's coverage. No regrets? Taejun asked, pulling her closer to him on the sofa. About the merger? About us? About any of it? Any of it. So-young considered the question seriously, as she always did. I regret that we wasted 2 years thinking we hated each other. I regret that it took corporate blackmail to bring us together. But regret falling in love with my husband? Never. Even if your husband is Kim Taejun, the most arrogant, controlling man in Seoul? Especially because he's Kim Taejun, she said, kissing him softly. The only man stubborn enough to be married to Park So-young. Outside their windows, Seoul glittered in the darkness, a city of endless possibilities and second chances. And in their penthouse above it all, Two former enemies had found something neither of their grandfathers could have planned for, a love born not from obligation, but from understanding, respect, and the gradual recognition that sometimes the best partnerships come from the most unlikely places. The forced marriage had become a chosen one, and the greatest rivalry in Korean business had transformed into its greatest love story.